Whilst we're on football-y based stories, do you mind sharing the story about Sam Porter? I mean, I've heard the story a couple of times, but when I read the book, I thought it was really great the way you got across the fact of preparation, opportunity. Some people can call it luck. I know you've got a strong view on that. Maybe you can just tell everybody about the Sam Porter story, and then I'll go on to some of the US related stuff, if that's all right. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So again, this is a lot of people, especially in the services industry, are all like, you know, we've got to sell. It's one thing doing the legal work, it's another thing bringing the work in. And to your point about imposter syndrome, when I joined Sheridan's, my worry was, well, I think I'm a good lawyer, but how am I going to bring lots of business in and high profile stuff and players and all that type of stuff to justify why the hell Sheridan's would want to employ me and put their trust in me. And on the surface level, what ended up happening is 4 months into my job at Sheridan's, there hadn't been a Premier League club takeover in 8.5 years. And I managed more or less my third client at Sheridan's to bring in Swansea, who we then did the takeover for. And so you can imagine all of my fellow partners and colleagues were saying, who's this superstar Daniel Geey coming in, and all of a sudden being able to do the first Premier League takeover. The truth is that great, but the backdrop to it was the interesting bit, I think. So the backdrop was that over the last about 20 years or 22 years, I'd been blogging on the football industry on every imaginable topic, if it's transfers, football regulations, disputes, whatever else it might be. I'd written about 350 blogs over about a 12, 14, 15, 16 year period. I managed to write one on football broadcasting rights about how valuable they were and how they were growing. I get an email from Sam Porter, who is the general counsel of DC United, and his boss is Jason Levian, who then bought Swansea. So he emails me saying, interesting blog, can we have a quick chat? Didn't know anything more than that. I met him on a Sunday morning. He interrogated me for 3 hours on the football regulations, on how transfers work, on how takeovers work. Jason then comes in his trackie, asking me another literally couple of hours of questions. That turned into the instruction and the work in order to then get the Swansea work. So on the surface, everyone says, lucky Daniel got the job, but the actual invisible stuff was the 20 years previously of doing all of these blogs, getting that knowledge from drafting it. And also the interesting thing there was, I asked Sam how he found my blog, and he said he just typed in football broadcasting rights, and mine was the first organic search on Google.
Wow.
And that was because of the algorithm. I hit the algorithm because of all of the good, hopeful, good content that I had written. So the invisible stuff is all of the hard grit and work and everything that just so happened hit the right nerve at the right time. So you call it luck, might have been, but I still had to be able to explain myself well enough to be able to do the job, and then for it to happen.
So that's where your kind of mantra comes from, right? Do the work.
Yeah.
Work hard. Network, because I know you're a big fan of that, and by definition that hard work's going to pay off at some point. Being in the right place.
I'm a massive fan of just playing the numbers game, in truth. I think you've just got to create all of these multiple opportunity frameworks. I think everyone sometimes thinks a bit binary, like if I do this, then I'll get to that. Otherwise, I'm starting from scratch again. Whereas I see it, and I know you do as well, in terms of relationship building, is like this flourishing tree in a way. And one thing leads to 5 things, and those 5 things might lead in different directions. The actual hardest thing is tracking it all and scaling it. That's what I find the most difficult, actually, lots of the time, is how do you keep all of these relationships strong? How do you manage to create touch points with everyone at different times? And then what do you go about saying to them, really?
Not everybody's a natural networker, right?
No one is a natural networker.
Client-facing. You don't think anybody's a natural networker? Okay.
I just think they've got good tactics.
Yeah. Have you got tips maybe that you can give? Because I know there's some people going to events soon. Have you got tips of how you ease your way into a certain situation, how you get the best out of going to in real world events?
Well, I know it might be hard to say, but I'm petrified by public speaking. Okay. And this is totally it's always out of my comfort zone. I'm willing to admit it, it's fine. And in the same way, I can have social anxiety as well in social settings as well, which I'm willing to admit it's no problem. Which means that, but I call that my monkey. The monkey on my shoulder, more or less. and my monkey is always the one. You're not good enough, you got imposter syndrome, you don't need to go to the event because there's nothing good that's going to come from it, you don't need to do the public speaking because you're going to be out of comfort zone, and you're definitely going to say something stupid. So don't bother with all of that. I try and do the opposite of what my monkey tells me.
Okay.
That's my very straight default. So I will put myself in, the social situations, even though probably a lot of the time I really don't want to necessarily do it. But regardless of that point, I think there's two really important tactics, I would say. I would actually call them tactics that you practice, because I don't think anyone's just a natural, talker or otherwise. And it comes from another book club one, which is How to Win Friends and Influence People. Terrible name for a book, but a very good book in itself, because it feels like it's a bit manipulative, but it's not really. Everybody loves talking about themselves. That's why I'm feeling really good at the moment. My ego is being stoked massively right now.
All these lights.
Correct, everyone's listening, everyone's judging. The reason why I say that is everybody loves speaking about themselves. So I am absolutely convinced that when you go to events, the thing that you've got to do really well is when you come out of any conversation, the other person thinking, I had such a great chat with Daniel then. And usually the way that they will come out of having that conversation is by speaking about themselves.
Right.
So there's the two things there. The first is practice the art of asking very open-ended questions. They can be generic or specific, it doesn't really matter, is the truth.
What do you mean by that?
Well, tell me. Good job. Tell me about the fantastic work that you're doing. Tell me how your agency is doing great stuff right now. Oh, where shall I begin? You know what I mean?
Right.
The other thing that happens as a result of that, which is really, really, really powerful, which I just think is even the better byproduct of that, is if you can multiply that 3 times in an evening, you get incredible intel. You're not just doing it, it also makes you feel at ease because you're not having to impress. You're not having to tell everyone whether you've got something to say or not, and adds to conversation. But the amount of times I've realized that the amount of intel that you get from the person about their company, about their personal lives, about their kids, about where they've gone on holiday, whatever else it might be, that intel becomes crucial at building a longer term foundational relationship with different people.
Good point.
So all you have to do to start is ask an open-ended question and then take that positive intel to be able to use positively for another day. And the simple thing that I always do, I still literally do it to this day, is for every type of networking event there will be a refreshments area somewhere. I'm being so ridiculously prescriptive now, but there are so many times where I haven't known anybody in the room at all. I will just put myself by the teas and coffees, and then when somebody is putting the sugar into their coffee, and just say, how are you enjoying things? That's it.
It's enough, it's the icebreaker.
And it can sometimes be so random that it's difficult to be able to do that. The other thing to do and not to do is the following. When you sit down next to somebody, purposely, do not wait for the 15 seconds of awkwardness before you say, oh, sorry, I haven't chatted, or whatever it is. As soon as you sit down, the reaction should be automatic to be like, how are you doing? What are you up to? And it sounds ridiculously corny and it's terrible, but I promise once you get over yourself, you feel a lot better about it.
Excellent.